In my last video, I talked about why I left Japan after 2 years in Sendai as an English teacher. I also said I wanted to make a more positive video about Japan and the wonders it contains. Well, lords and ladies, this is that video. Throughout all of my explaining to people why I left Japan, all of my complaining, all of my justifications, I will always end by telling people the same thing. Japan is a wonderful place to visit. Because that's absolutely true. While living in the country comes with its own issues and it isn't for everyone, visiting Japan is something I think everyone should do at least once. In my time in Japan, I had my parents come to visit me for 2 weeks, one friend spent 10 days there with me, and another friend came for 2 separate 10-day trips. They all still bring up how wonderful their visits to Japan were. I really do think that it's a place where anyone can find something to love. It's incredibly expensive, but a 2-week trip to Japan is one of the greatest experiences you could ever have. A trip of that length gives you time to see Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, and at least one other city depending on how you get there. I took people to Sendai, I took them to Sapporo. I personally plan on taking a trip back to Japan whenever I can save up the bajillion dollars it'll take, and see the island of Kyushu, which I sadly never visited in my time abroad. 2 weeks is good, but there's just so much to see when there's an entire country worth seeing. The first place any visit to Japan will take you is Tokyo, a city so big and full of cool stuff that you could easily spend 2 weeks there and never leave. But Tokyo is also home to the mecca of anime, Akihabara. There's also the less well-known Nakano Broadway, which has its own charms, and you can even go to other parts of the city like Ikebukuro and get sort of the same effect. Some people choose this because of how touristy Akihabara has become. I went every time I was in Tokyo, something made easier by the fact that it was only 2 stops away from Tokyo Station. One of my main complaints about Japan was how it was not really easy to connect to people over anime, or at least not with native Japanese people about it. That remains true. I mean, I never made any new friends in Akiba, but that doesn't mean I didn't have amazing anime-related experiences. Akiba is home to shops upon shops upon shops, full of anime merch from figurines to cell phone straps to manga to doujins. There are sex shops and hat shops. You can get KFC or you can get Monster ramen noodles. Shops sell classic video games in near mint condition, and there are even classic arcades tucked away in there. A friend who visited me had the complaint that Akiba is sort of like a big mall, and it wasn't as fun for him because he couldn't buy a bunch of things and then still fit them in his carry-on the flight home. But there are still cool gems to find, like taiyaki shaped like Magikarp. One of the best things I saw in Akiba was a karaoke place where each room was themed after a different series, including Eva, Final Fantasy, and my favorite, the Monster Hunter room. It was just like normal karaoke, but I would argue that singing Queen dressed up like Tama Mitsune is much better than just regular type. I think this really speaks to the real draw of visiting Japan as an anime fan. It's not about buying merch. After all, most of that stuff you can get imported, albeit at a higher price. It's about experiences. For the release of Monster Hunter World, Universal Studios Japan had an attraction called Monster Hunter The Real. They had done the same thing when Double Cross came out, which is known as Generations Ultimate in the US. The one I went to was ultimately disappointing, especially when I had seen what the previous one looked like, but going there was still an experience I would never have been offered at the American Universal Studios, no matter how well Iceborne sells. Another great example of this is pop-up shops and theme cafes. A lot of large anime shops in Japan will have entire floors dedicated to tie-ins and promotional events. All kinds of series, new and old, get them, and they usually offer themed food, exclusive trinkets, and merchandise. Once in Akiba, I stumbled across a cafe doing a Yu Yu Hakusho tie-in. They had some really awesome food. I bought a Dragon of the Darkness Flame tie. I even got some coasters at the end of it. That one, like many, was only there for a limited time, but there are other places that are more permanent. In Shinjuku, there used to be a Capcom bar that sold food and drinks based on the different properties they own, including Monster Hunter, Resident Evil, Phoenix Wright, Sengoku Basara, and others. A lot of the items were accompanied by a little show or song. My favorite was a zombie stew that involved them turning off all the lights and carrying it out to you with candles, while the TVs played the teaser cinematic from Resident Evil 7. My friend and I were devastated when we found out that Capcom Bar was shutting down for renovations. But we were delighted when we found out that it was going to reopen as Hunter's Bar and dedicate itself entirely to the Monster Hunter franchise. The place is still open and full of cool Monhun decorations and tons of themed food items and drinks, both alcoholic and not. They even have quests that you can work your way through by ordering specific items, and they reward you with different exclusive trinkets. I lived too far away to take on these expensive challenges when I was living in Japan, and someone visiting probably wouldn't have enough time to get through the requirements. Thankfully, my friend went there all the time, and he was nice enough to give me one of his rewards. There was another themed bar much closer to me. What a Wonderful World was a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure bar I found that was covered in merchandise and had a massive cocktail list with a different one for each character. Any of the ones they hadn't included could be made up upon request. They were even streaming Part 5 from Netflix on a projector. I had a great conversation with the bartender who wanted to hear about all the ridiculous name changes forced through on the American release. I really regret finding it so late in my stay that I could only go once. Living in the real-life version of Morio also led to me going to a JoJo exhibition chock full of original pages and sketches and cool art pieces. They got the whole city involved. It was really cool. There was another exhibition called Ripples of Adventure in Tokyo and Osaka that sadly I was never able to make it to, which is something I still agonize over. You would never get these kinds of museum exhibit-like attractions in any other country. For the 50th anniversary of Shonen Jump, they had a special exhibition in Tokyo that ran for months. I found out all too late when I finally went that there had been multiple versions of the exhibition, each representing a different era of Jump's history. I had just missed the 90s exhibit, clearly the best one, by a few weeks. Thankfully, I was still able to pick up some nice commemorative books that show a pretty comprehensive picture of each exhibit, complete with English translation. It helps, but it doesn't really fully compare to being at one of these things in person. Plus, these places have collectibles that you miss out on, like these Monster Hunter Sukajans I bought at Tokyo Game Show both years I went. I was happy to get to Tokyo Game Show, but one of the things I missed that I kind of almost consider a mortal sin on my anime-loving soul is that I never made it to Comiket in my entire time in Japan. There's something to be said about being able to just walk into a shop and pick up what you want. Not having to look online, not needing to track it down, to being able to stop at the Poke Center or Jump Store on your way out of the train station, or just to check for new seasonal items, seeing flyers for author signings at your local Kikuya, then cursing the fact that you've missed yet another one, browsing through the manga and picking up series with interesting covers, many of which are not being translated or maybe never will. Sure, I may not have always been able to connect with people or relate to them about my hobby, but that level of accessibility, that connection, is probably the thing I miss most about being a weeb in Japan. Now I know the title of this video is Why Would a Weeb Love Japan? But I also want to address a positive that all people can appreciate. Toilets. You've probably heard about the crazy future toilets in Japan, and honestly a lot of that is overblown, but make no mistake. Bathrooms in Japan are amazing. For starters, they're clean. Usually. There are some outdoor toilets and parks and other public spaces that don't look like they've been cleaned since the Meiji era, but I'm not talking about those. Most of the bathrooms you come across in Japan are really clean. You'll find some toilets with a plastic seal around the seat where you can wave your hand in front of a sensor to get a new seat cover to rotate its way around. And if you're someone used to the horror that is American public bathrooms, with stalls that start 2 feet off the ground, end short enough for anyone over 6 feet to see you, and have gaps between the doors so wide they leave you with no shred of privacy, Japanese restrooms offer a level of safety and comfort that will make you weep with joy. A lot of places like convenience stores or bars have their own single occupancy bathrooms, which are great. But if you come across something larger, have no fear. Doors and dividers that extend from floor to ceiling, full-length latch guards that cover the door gap, locks that actually fucking work. It's like you have a private room to poop in. Sometimes there's even another door before the stall door itself. Don't like people listening to your disgusting, shameful bodily functions? Some men's and most women's toilets can play the sound of running water to drown out whatever inhuman noises you're struggling to contain. To cap it off, most Japanese toilets are equipped with washlets to shoot warm water at your butt, so you get you the fullest level of clean. Using them in a public restroom is something a lot of the people I knew were uncomfortable with, but the one in your hotel room should at least earn your respect. This kind of thing is unfamiliar to most Americans and might seem off-putting, but when you really think about it, if you got poop on your hand, would you just wipe it off with some paper and call it good? I know I've spent way too long talking about bathrooms, but seriously, I fully intend to install a washlet on my toilet when I finally live somewhere that isn't rent-controlled. I know it sounds weird, but Japanese bathrooms are sort of a microcosm for the focus Japan puts on service. I've mentioned before the idea of omotenashi, or hospitality, which mixes with the strong collectivist sense of responsibility to society that causes Japan to be one of the cleanest and safest countries in the world. The people of Japan are vitally important to what makes Japan great. Some people will tell you that there's a more sinister aspect underneath the smiles of shopkeepers and the impeccably clean streets of Japan, and they're right to a degree. It is hard to say if the enthusiasm with which your cashier thanks you for being their customer at KFC really has much sincerity behind it. The pressure to fit into the societal mold and the negative repercussions of not doing so are real, but that doesn't mean that every person you meet or every bit of customer service is some fake act of kindness being performed for you at metaphorical gunpoint. You could take the interest and friendliness you experience from the people of Japan as fake or out of obligation, and you'd be right in some cases, but you wouldn't be right in all of them. Japanese people are friendly. And while they may over-exaggerate it at times, like now how they never stop complimenting you about your skill with chopsticks no matter how long you've lived there, but it comes from a good place. And most of them just want you to have a good time. My closest Japanese friend made a name for himself among my visiting American friend group when we all went out together, and he spent the entire night ensuring that no man went more than a minute without a beer in his hand, while he enthusiastically asked them about themselves. There's a theory out there that the physical act of smiling makes you happy, and not just the other way around. If that is true, then maybe putting on a happy face for others can make it real, even if it's just a little bit. The service in Japan is so good you wouldn't even believe it. Everyone is always smiling at you and bowing and sounds like they want to be there. Most restaurants have call buttons at the table that you can just push whenever you want to order or you need a refill, and you don't have a server coming around every 5 minutes asking, "You folks doing okay?" before angrily staring holes in the back of your head from across the room, waiting for you to get the fuck out so they can seat as many tables as possible. Not having to deal with the garbage system that is tipping means that going out is less expensive, and you never really feel rushed, while somehow getting a waitstaff that's invariably far friendlier and more attentive. There's a phenomena called reverse culture shock that happens to people when they come home after a long time abroad. The first time this happened to me was at a Popeyes at the Detroit airport I stopped at after about a year in Japan. I stepped up to the counter and was met with an aggravated, "What do you want?" I was genuinely taken aback. It took a second for my brain to process what was happening, and that caused me to be hit with a, "Sir, I need you to order. We have people waiting." I know this interaction doesn't sound like much, but I had gotten so used to the Japanese transaction, which is so polite and standardized that it pretty much follows a script. Going to the same restaurant a few times feels like watching a rerun. To be given such a different response out of nowhere really throws you for a loop. I mean it when I say, after I moved back from Japan, it took me about a month to readjust to America, where the mentality is, "You're lucky I'm here right now," and not the other way around. One thing's for sure, living in Japan made me a much friendlier and more polite person to the people that I encounter every day. The positive attitude and good service also extends to the quality of the food. Most people outside of Japan probably have their knowledge of Japanese cuisine limited to sushi, and in many cases that knowledge only includes maki-zushi or rolled sushi, and not the regular and far more common raw fish on a bed of rice variety. But Japan's food extends far beyond raw and cooked fish, although many of those dishes are delicious. Fans of anime might be familiar with takoyaki, okonomiyaki, yakisoba, or hamburger steak, but there's a lot of others. Probably my favorite style of Japanese cooking is hot pot style dishes like nabe and shabu shabu. Shabu shabu is a style of dining where you get a big pot of broth, sometimes more than one kind, in which you dump vegetables and mushrooms and noodles and anything else you want. You get thin slices of pork or beef, and you can even get chicken if you feel like some kind of monster, but you take that raw meat and swish it around in the boiling hot broth, and then once it cooks, you can dip it in some sauce or a raw egg and eat it. Shabu shabu also has the benefit of being all you can eat. You pay for a set amount of time, usually 90 minutes, and you can just keep ordering meat and putting more add-ons and broth in until time runs out. This style of dinner is called tabe hodai, and it's incredibly common in Japan. Yakiniku restaurants often have multiple levels of pricing that let you choose the quality and selection of meats that you want. They give you a tablet to place your orders with, and then bring out the raw meat to the table for you to cook yourself. I've actually seen one chain of yakiniku restaurant in the US, but their menu limits you to a predetermined set of meats, and it's a little pricier if you split it among their recommended number of people. A shocking number of restaurants in Japan do have tabe hodai options, anything from sushi to soba. My favorite tabe hodai experience I ever had was at the Sapporo Beer Factory, where they had a beer hall with all-you-could-eat Genghis Khan and all-you-could-drink Sapporo, and it was roughly $40 American for 2 hours. Speaking of all-you-can-drink, another common option at Japanese restaurants is nomi hodai. For sometimes as little as $10, you can get between 1 and 3 hours of all-you-can-drink alcohol. Or soda if that's your thing. If you want something better than Asahi, you'll likely have to pay a little more, but in my experience, things capped out around $40 for a nomi hodai at a karaoke place that included sake and straight doubles of Maker's Mark on the plan. Karaoke is a much bigger deal in Japan than a lot of people realize. It's a super common way to end the night, and everyone does it from 13-year-old girls to 60-year-old salarymen. You see the kind that Westers are more familiar with in snack bars and some other places, but the traditional style private karaoke rooms are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You can find them all around major cities, small towns have them. It's not uncommon to see a different location of the same karaoke chain within sight of the one you're stumbling out of at 3 in the morning. There's varying sizes of rooms that can handle anywhere from one person to a party. The biggest group I've ever gone with had about 30 people, which was kind of terrible because it took forever to get to your song and people would sing over you, and especially douchey people might stop your song halfway through. I love karaoke rooms, and I really wish I had had more friends in Japan who liked to go to them that didn't live 2 hours away in Tokyo. The song selection varies by chain, but you can get a lot of good English songs, and even some Japanese ones with romanized lyrics. My favorite thing to do to improve my Japanese was to sing my favorite anime openings with Japanese text, and I also sang a lot of Crush 40. Nightlife in Japan is truly exceptional. I have no idea what age range of people watches my videos, but if you are over the age of 20, it's an amazing place to go. Even if you don't drink, Japanese bars are a fun way to meet natives, they often have creative or outlandish themes, and at least some of them have really solid food. What really makes it for me, though, is the people. I don't know that I ever went to a bar in Japan without having at least some conversation with the bartender or some patron. A lot of it is just the standard, where are you from, how long have you been in Japan, when are you leaving, but if you could put yourself out there, and if you speak some Japanese, it can open up some amazing new experiences. Some bars are also run by fellow foreigners, and that can be a lot of fun in a different way. I've heard crazy stories about the Yakuza, out-of-control parties, and what life is like after 30 years in Sunrise Land from just talking to my bartenders. I've also gotten a lot of free drinks, so that helps. One of the primary reasons Japan can have this strange assortment of niche bars is due to the way most of them are set up. You might be familiar with Japan's bar alleys tucked away off side streets, but another incredibly common thing to see is office buildings full of bars and restaurants. Japanese cities are strangely vertical. In a country where space comes at a premium, the solution seems to be to build office buildings and pack them full of businesses. You'll have buildings 8 or 10 stories tall, full of different stores, or one store with different departments on each level. If you've ever played Pokemon, the store in Celadon City is a great example of this. When you head into the nightlife district of a Japanese city, you'll find entire buildings dedicated purely to bars. Because they're basically the size of a small office, a lot of these establishments can only handle 10 or 20 people, with some places like the famous Golden Guy in Shinjuku, Tokyo, having places that can barely fit 5. To stand out, these places will adopt themes. Sometimes they're gimmicks, but other times they come from that obsessive otaku love for things that the Japanese just seem so good at. The attraction of Japan is not just limited to neon signs and last trains home. Japanese schools teach the importance of Japan's cultural heritage, along with the importance of the environment and preserving nature. Japan has some of the most beautiful natural areas in the world, and their dedication to their history has led to many old shrines and temples remaining standing to this very day. There's a reason why Japan has more UNESCO World Heritage Sites than any other country in the world. Part of revering nature means that a lot of these buildings are made out of natural materials. For example, the stage at Kiyomizu Temple uses interlocking wood and doesn't contain a single nail. Unfortunately, being made of wood also makes things prone to catching on fire. You'd be shocked by the number of historic buildings that have burned down, been rebuilt, and then burned down a second time. Even so, the recreations are no less stunning. There's nothing that can really compare to walking through a forest pathway and suddenly approaching a shrine that's over 1,200 years old. I would definitely recommend that anyone who visits Japan makes Kyoto part of their trip. The ancient capital is filled to the brim with shrines big and small. The Japanese have a term called a power spot, which is meant to describe a place that fills you with some kind of spiritual force or makes a big impact on you. And Kyoto is full of them. But the natural beauty doesn't stop at shrines. Out in the mountains all over Japan, thermal hot springs bubble up hot mineral water, creating probably my favorite part about living in Japan, hot springs. Bathing is a large part of Japanese culture. There are public bathhouses, most hotels will generally have a public bath in addition to the in-room baths, and even my gym had hot and cold baths for after you showered post-workout. While most Americans are prudish when it comes to being naked around strangers, public bathing is seen as completely normal for the Japanese from the time they're children. It's really a shame that this kind of thing isn't popular in the States. Both indoor and outdoor baths are incredibly relaxing. And if you're willing to take a day trip or book a room in an onsen village, you'll be treated with some of the most amazing vistas that will speak to your very soul, all visible from your comfortable spot sitting naked in 100-degree water. Not to mention the fact that a stay at these hotels usually includes a multi-course meal for just you and your group. Many have things like karaoke and ping pong, they have spas, and you get to walk around in comfy clothes. Ryokan are honestly amazing, and I would live in one if I could. The thing I miss most about Japan on a daily basis has got to be the high-quality mass transit. I lived there for 2 years without ever needing a car, and excluding taxis home from the bar, I can probably count the number of times I rode in a car on both hands. Bullet trains are amazing, and being able to sit in a comfortable chair while playing your Switch as people bring you snacks and you watch the landscape fly by beats the hell out of any solo road trip. Plus, they cut travel time in half. Traversing roughly the distance from Chicago to St. Louis takes an hour and 45 minutes if you take the express. But local trains are still clean and convenient, provided you're not trying to get somewhere during rush hour. And even the buses are a great choice if that's what you need. Now, if you were to want to take a trip to Japan and experience the magic for yourself, one of the best times you could go is in late summer. The winter has its own charms, especially if you like hot springs. But spring and fall are usually crowded with tourists who want to see the changing seasons. Spring is really bad with this, and cherry blossoms, while beautiful, spell packed hotels and expensive plane tickets. Summer, to my knowledge, is not as bad, and it has the added benefit of festivals. So many festivals. Any fan of anime is going to be familiar with your standard summer matsuri, but they go way beyond that with all kinds of things you can see. Parades, floats, dancing, all of it is exciting, and if you plan it out right, you can travel to multiple cities and multiple festivals one after the other. My favorite of the ones I saw was the Nebuta Festival in Aomori. The floats in their parade are beautiful and plentiful. Each one is its own work of art, and the fact that it's a parade means that standing in one place and drinking as they go by is a totally legitimate option. Just be smart and get a hotel. I was an idiot, and I thought I could get a net cafe to crash in. Instead, I spent my night sleeping on a karaoke room bench waiting for the first bullet train out. The other reason it's a great idea to visit Japan in the summertime is baseball. Now, I know extolling the entertainment value of a sport to a bunch of nerds may seem a bit off, but bear with me, because Japanese baseball is a very different beast, and it comes with an appeal all its own. I 100% believe that anyone, regardless of how much they like baseball or understand it, can go to a Japanese game and enjoy themselves. I've never been a massive fan of baseball. I'm more of a hockey guy myself, but I have been to games in person and I've watched a lot of games on TV. For me, the appeal of going to a game in the States only really goes as far that I get to be there in person, and I don't really feel that much more amped up than watching it at home. It's mostly just an excuse to spend time with people I care about and drink overpriced beer. I lived like 15 minutes away from Wrigley Field for 2 years, and I did not go to a single Cubs game in that time. Conversely, while living in Sendai, I lived about 7 subway stops away from Kobo Stadium, with a transfer in the middle, and I went to more games than I can actually remember. I didn't technically go to all of them, but I did at least go to the stadium. I don't think all baseball fields in Japan do this, but the one in Sendai has a beer garden outside, along with a bunch of other concession stands and team shops wrapped around the stadium. And in the beer garden, they sell official team craft beer, and they have a few TV screens showing the game. I had more than a few times just going to watch the game in the beer garden before heading a few stops down the train to meet some friends. Other nights, I'd watch until the 7th inning, and then go inside with half-price tickets. The Rakuten Eagles are not a very good team, so outfield seats drop to like $8. But the experience in the actual game is the real draw. Japanese people are the masters of committing to a hobby. The country seems to live by the mantra, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing, which is where the whole concept of an otaku comes from. Baseball fans are no different, and the serious ones dedicate their time going to every single game, knowing every stat, and becoming an encyclopedia of their team's history. I'm sure we've all met American sports fans like that, but now imagine an entire stadium full of only that. The cheering at Japanese baseball games never stops the whole time. Every player has a song or chant that the crowd does when they're up at bat. It's not always unique, and there are some repeated melodies, but you still have to respect the dedication to learning a player's cheers and the general team cheers, especially when a lot of them change season to season. That and the flag wavers. Seriously, how good of shape do you have to be in to wave a giant flag for half the inning all game? In Sendai, at least, they actually put the songs up on the big screen so casuals like me could follow along as well. But make no mistake, the superfans have this shit down. The stadiums also have designated seats for the visiting team's fans, and they never fail to form their own cheering section, large or small, at every game. At my first Eagles game, I was amazed to have what looked like a 10-year-old boy sitting a few seats down from me, cheering for the visiting Oryx Buffaloes. It was amazing to see him seemingly unsupervised, but it was even more amazing to hear him call out every chant and cheer perfectly in time with the distant cheering section, like he was standing right there with them. My favorite part of every NPB game I attended was the 7th inning stretch. There's no take me out to the ball game here. Each team has their own theme song and they get to sing it, starting with the visitors. I love nearly all of these songs, especially the ones that feel straight out of a 70s or 80s anime.
Let's go!
My favorite, despite my hometown allegiances, is the Toyo Carp song, which is incredibly endearing. The last thing I'll say about Japanese baseball is that I just love the concessions at the baseball stadiums. Instead of your standard fare of hot dogs and beer, you'll find bento complete with rice and sake in wooden souvenir cups. Although you can find more standard options in stalls around the stadium, at least when I went. Regardless of which teams you see and where you see them play, there are like 4 or 5 teams in the Tokyo area alone, so you have no excuse not to go to one. Even if you're not really a sports person, you should definitely try to check out a game. They are massively entertaining, and if I had the time and the money, I would go see one at every stadium. Now, I'm sure there are other things I love about Japan that I could probably come up with. I'm pretty sure I haven't mentioned arcades or anything like that, but I think this is where I'm going to have to end it because this video is long enough and I have a tendency to just start rambling. But I wanted to use this video to sort of blog post a bit and make it clear that I love a lot of stuff about Japan, even if I didn't love living there. I will always recommend that anyone and everyone make a trip out there at least once in their life, preferably a longer one. I know I'm already planning my next trip back. Thanks a lot for watching my video. I've been getting more and more comments recently, and they've been mostly positive, which I really appreciate. I've had some big changes in my life in the past year, and that's part of why this video took several months longer to finish than I expected. I'd like to speed up my workflow moving forward, but I know better than to make any kind of promise on that. I really appreciate your patience, and I will promise that the videos I put out will only take a long time because I want them to be the best that they can be. My next video will be another RTFM, and it's one I've been really excited to get to, so I hope you look forward to it. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.